Welcome back to Miniature Mashup, my mashed potatoes. So my focus lately has been on painting horror miniatures. I like monsters of all kinds and regular men and women doing their best to survive them. Undead are a big favorite of mine. They're a universal sort of antagonist that works in almost any setting. And undead can look like anything. The weirder they are, the better. I mean, that's the entire design principle behind the monsters in the From Software games. Now, I keep a collection of the sort of plus-size herolcix and also some of the oddball herolcix in a box, and I've been sitting on this weirdo for some time, and I think it's time I turned him into something creepy. I don't know if you've read what's referred to charitably as Classic Spider-Man or Hombre de Aracno in Spain, but it's not very good. Not to say there's never been a good classic Spider-Man story, there's some real high points, and Spidey was a fresh take on the superhero, especially when you look at the troubling circumstances of battling his crime fighting and life as an impoverished teen. But there are also decades of Spider-Man where he's sort of caught in the Groundhog Day scenario where he just sort of fights some new gimmicky goon, and most of them are just awful. Lots of guys with modes of travel that are supposed to be futuristic but are simply embarrassing, like Skateboard Gary or the ambulatory Dr. Longlegs and the dreaded guy who stole the inflatable wheel thing from his vacation in Cancun. And that's not to even claim that they were simply just throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks, because that kind of mad creativity can be lauded. No, it was very derivative, and for that they really would just find whatever the audience responded to, with their soapbox. Marvel was famous for interacting with their audience and their readers, and then they would just lean into that. So Green Goblin, a classic villain, famously threw flaming pumpkin bombs, and the kids went crazy for it, and so we got a stream of villains who just threw different things, boomerangs, rings, balls, and this became such a tired trope that the Spider-Man writers even had a self-parody character called Typeface, a grammar Nazi who threw metal letters with sharpened edges at people. And that's not to mention all the reworked versions of their big hit characters. So, there's many different Green Goblins, there's all kinds of insect-themed villains, and there's a bunch of different versions of the Venom symbiote. Even Sandman himself has a knockoff character in the pages of Spider-Man called Hydra Man, who is essentially just Sandman, except instead of sand, he's made of water, and the two have clashed, mixed up, and became a monster together. It's whatever. Next to Batman, it's probably Spider-Man who has the biggest catalog of one-off garbage villains you've never heard of. And I know Batman is notorious for having the best rogues gallery in comics, but what we think of as his modern rogues gallery is really just a greatest hits compilation distilled over decades. Both of these characters have been around for decades. During that time, they were mostly written for kids by people just struggling to hit a deadline, so there's a lot of low-effort crap. But if you throw enough darts, occasionally you hit a bullseye, and Stan Lee and Steve Ditko hit several. One of them is this guy, Sandman. Civilian name, William Baker, was your typical hardened criminal who wandered into the wrong nuclear testing grounds and got himself nuked and turned into a nearly indestructible monster. And that's how you know the folks at Nagasaki and Hiroshima were all decent people, because cop-murdering psychopaths can always turn certain death into a power-up. I don't want to credit Stan Lee for inventing this trope. There's plenty of old-time radio programs where hardened killers return from the dead as something more than human, and folklore is also full of such creatures. Honestly, I'm not really sure I need to credit anyone with the creation of Sandman, since I suspect that he's just a knockoff of Clayface, a character that first debuted in Detective Comics number 298 in December 1961, a little less than 2 years prior to Sandman's first appearance. I mean, how on the nose is this cover art? Come on. In both instances, these characters presented a threat that could not be overcome by the hero's normally reliable and considerable physical abilities, as they were both essentially sentient yard filler with no vital organs or physical limitations. Not only do they share the same power set, shape-shifting and immunity to most kinetic attacks, they also have the same weaknesses of intense heat and water. Only canines in love have had their plans ruined by someone with a hose more often than these two supervillains. There are several Sandman herolcix, and some would make better conversion projects than others. This one I like quite a bit for its potential, while the mini itself is a bit cartoony. Well, that's enough preamble, let's get to the crafting. So I've already stripped this herolcix with acetone. You can see he's kind of a ghostly pale color with a little bit of paint left in his recesses. I'm going to start by chopping off the top of his head. I don't want to take the whole thing off for reasons that'll become apparent. I'm sawing away with an old X-Acto blade. I'm happy to report that I've got new blades on this knife now, so it won't be so laborious to remove parts of little plastic models in the future. Just going to clean up the work I did there with that old X-Acto knife with my wire cutters. Now I've got a bunch of bits from the old plastic GW Skeletons box set from their old Undead Fantasy line. This particular skull doesn't have a bottom jaw, but I like that because I'm going to set it up on the jaw that already existed to try to get more of a natural looking fit. This isn't necessarily a skeletal undead, it may just have skeletal components, in this case, the top of the skull. I don't really like the cartoony mallet. I don't think it reads as what it's supposed to. I may save this bit as the top of a weapon for somebody else or something. I might just chuck it. I don't think it's a particularly good sculpt, but it certainly doesn't evoke the sort of horror feel that I want from this miniature, so off it goes. The skeletal arm with this comically oversized axe also came from that same Games Workshop skeleton box set. This was probably... the metal components went to sort of the champions and the character, what they call character models in the unit. I'm just going to cut this at the natural place to slice this at, which is the elbow joint that's provided. Going to get my clippers in there. Takes a little effort, but we get it off pretty clean. Looks pretty good. Now I want to get that skinny little skeleton into the sort of well-muscled arm of our Sandman miniature, and in order to make a slot for it to fit in, I'm just going to go at it with a Dremel tool. I need kind of a wide hole, and I also need to be kind of deep, and I don't want to spend all day working with a pin vise, which I don't really think is the right tool for the job here. Using some of the last of my super strong industrial adhesive, I put that on the end of our little skeletal arm, and then I slam that into our Sandman miniature, and then I put him in a vise to hold him in a position that will allow for it to dry correctly. Sometimes you can wire things up too, using paper clips and stuff, but I think this works okay. His base is something I've shown on this channel earlier. I just got a sack of these sort of socket protectors. They're these plastic things you put over wall sockets to stop your toddler from turning themselves into a charcoal briquette. They're not the cheapest things in the world brand new, but I got these at a thrift store, giant sack of them, and they make excellent large bases. I'm just sticking our miniature there with a little E6000. I'm also going to use some bits of broken cork as rocks, also stuck on with E6000. Then I follow it up with a little white PVA glue and then a dip into some craft sand for flocking. When I completed this, I probably didn't have any spray primer, or it was raining outside, or the weather was miserable in some other way, so I did just brush prime this. Something you don't get to see. Brush prime this? I did just brush prime this, which is something you don't get to see very often on this channel. Pretty sure I started with either cinnamon or burnt sienna. After that, I use a darker brown and a thinner paint to just sort of lay in the shadows. And then it's time to dry brush some highlights on. Now, normally on a smooth surface, I recommend using a glaze for highlights, but chalky highlighting on this character works. And so we're just dry brushing. I just like to use a makeup brush and downstrokes for this particular project. Then I'm just going back in with some Nuln Oil to get some of the deeper shadows, like in the eye sockets and such. Then some more highlights on the face. We want to spend particular attention to the face, as always with a model, and then sort of a sloppy attempt at an overall wet blend of highlights. If you'd like to take a look at this project or see some projects we've done in the past, why not come over to the Facebook page of the Miniature Mashup. We've got a really nice group of people there. You can see all that stuff, know when new videos are coming out. As always, I'd like to ask you to like and subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything. I know that more than half of the people who watch my videos aren't subscribed, which blows my mind. I always assume all the people coming back month after month are subscribers. That's not the case. So if you're watching this, please subscribe. Just takes a second. If you like this content, this is pretty much what we do on this channel, so you'll get more of that. Because this guy is some very obviously supernatural undead, I am going to take the axe in that direction, not going for realism with the axe, going for kind of a stylized ghostly blue. And then we'll do the highlights on the stones of our cork. Our cork rocks we're going to make gray highlights. A great way to support this channel is to go over to my eBay store and pick up some of the miniatures. I've got so much Games Workshop stuff that I'm going just letting go for almost nothing. I've got great pre-painted miniatures for Call of Cthulhu, as well as so many other really good deals. And if you don't like the prices I've got, all of my sales have the option for you to make an offer. So we'll come up with a price that you can agree on. Really helps me out, puts a really affordable, really nice miniature in your hands, keeps the channel going, guys. As always, thanks for watching. I hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.